No one ever sits you down and explains the rules, not the real ones. You are handed a binder on your first day, glossy cover, company logo embossed in silver. Inside are policies on expense reporting, vacation accrual, acceptable use of company devices. You are walked through performance metrics during onboarding, how goals cascade from the top, how your contributions ladder up. It all feels rational, transparent, like a map handed to you before a journey. But the most important rules, the ones that shape your entire experience, are never written anywhere. You learn them slowly, through the colleague who jokes a little too freely in meetings and is never corrected, through the project that gets fast-tracked, not because it's urgent, but because it belongs to a certain person, through the silence that falls when you ask a question no one wants to answer. These moments don't make sense at first. They feel like static, brief interruptions in an otherwise clear signal. And by the time you understand the pattern, by the time you can name what you are seeing, those invisible rules have already been shaping your career for years. Not through force, but through quiet, cumulative influence, like water smoothing stone. I remember the first time something felt off. It was a Thursday afternoon in a conference room with too much glass. We had just wrapped a 90-minute discussion about resource allocation. The data was clear. Team A needed support. Team B was over-resourced. I had laid out the numbers on slide 12, clean, color-coded, impossible to misread. And then the senior director looked up and said, "I hear what you are saying, but I think we will keep things as they are for now." No explanation, no pushback on the data itself. Just a gentle closing of the door. Later, in the hallway, a colleague who had been there longer pulled me aside, not with advice, just a quiet observation. That budget protects Sarah's team, and Sarah just had her second child. Leadership's being thoughtful. I nodded. I understood. But something in me tilted. It wasn't that the decision was wrong. Human systems need humanity. It was that the real criteria, the unspoken priority, had never entered the room as a factor. It lived entirely off script. And if you didn't know to look for it, the decision made no sense at all. That's often how the unspoken rules begin, not as instructions, but as corrections. Not with a memo, but with a glance, a hesitation, a redirection that feels almost polite. At the time, I assumed I was missing information, that there was context I didn't have yet. And so, like most people, I adjusted myself, not the system. I worked harder. I listened more carefully for subtext beneath the words. I tried to be easier to work with, not by changing my values, but by softening my edges. I didn't realize then that I was learning a second language, one that is spoken in glances, timing, and what goes unsaid. And fluency in that language would matter more than any skill listed on my resume. over time, patterns emerge if you are willing to see them. You notice who speaks freely in meetings, their interruptions treated as passion, while others are gently reminded to let people finish. You notice who is allowed to change their mind without consequence, strategic pivoting, while others are labeled inconsistent for the same behavior. You notice that clarity is welcomed, but only from voices already trusted. That disagreement is acceptable, but only when it arrives wrapped in deference, when it feels familiar rather than disruptive. I once watched two people make the exact same point in a leadership meeting. The first, a man with 20 years tenure, was met with nods. Sharp observation, someone said. The second, a woman 3 years in, was met with a pause, then a polite but firm redirection. That's one perspective. Let's hear others. Same words, same room, entirely different receptions, and you begin to see the deeper architecture. Being competent is expected, but being too competent can make others uncomfortable. Not because excellence is punished, but because it shifts the emotional weather of a room. It raises unspoken questions. If she knows this much, what else does she see? One of the hardest rules to learn is that being right doesn't always matter. Being aligned does. This isn't about manipulation, at least not usually. It's about comfort, predictability, the quiet human need for environments that feel emotionally safe, even when they are not objectively fair. Corporate life doesn't just reward outcomes. It rewards people who make the structure feel stable, who don't trigger defensiveness in leaders carrying their own unspoken pressures, who know when to push and when to let a flawed decision stand, because preserving relational capital matters more than winning this one battle. These are not evil rules. They are human rules, woven into systems built by people who are also navigating uncertainty, protecting their own positions, trying to feel safe in rooms where power flows invisibly. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. For a long time, I thought integrity meant ignoring these rules, keeping my head down, letting my work speak, trusting that fairness would correct itself if I just stayed consistent, stayed kind, stayed excellent. I believed that to acknowledge the unspoken rules was to participate in something compromised, that to play the game was to lose a piece of myself. But what I learned, slowly and painfully, is that refusing to see the rules doesn't make you principled. It makes you unprotected. Because decisions are still being made in rooms you are not in. Narratives are still forming about your intentions, your ambition, your reliability, based on fragments others choose to share. And your absence from those conversations isn't interpreted as purity. It's interpreted as disinterest, or naivete, or a lack of political awareness, which is code for doesn't understand how things work here. The unspoken rules don't pause just because you choose not to play. They continue operating, like gravity, whether you acknowledge them or not. And the cost of that refusal isn't moral superiority, it's missed opportunities, misread intentions. A slow erosion of influence, not because you failed, but because you were speaking a different language than the room. This isn't a call to become cynical or manipulative. It's an acknowledgement that systems have weather. And you can choose not to carry an umbrella, but you will still get wet. There comes a moment, usually later than we would like, when the picture finally sharpens. For me, it was during an exit interview, not my own, a colleague's. She was leaving after 15 years. Talented, respected, quietly passed over 3 times for roles she was objectively qualified for. As she spoke about her decision to leave, she wasn't bitter. She was clear-eyed. And in that clarity, I saw my own history reflected back. Not as a series of personal failures or lucky breaks, but as a pattern, a structure. I realized then that corporate life isn't chaotic. It's patterned. The promotions that surprised me, the feedback that felt misaligned, the projects that gained momentum for reasons beyond their merit, they were not random. They followed a logic, just not the logic I had been taught to expect. And that realization can feel like grief. Not because you were naive, though you were, in the gentle way all newcomers are, but because you were sincere. You showed up in good faith. You believed the contract was mutual. And grief isn't for the system. It's for the version of yourself who didn't yet know the full terrain. But grief, in time, makes space for something quieter. Compassion. For yourself. For others navigating the same invisible currents. And a new kind of agency. Not the agency of changing the system overnight, but the agency of moving within it with eyes open. Learning the unspoken rules doesn't make you cynical. It makes you aware. And awareness changes how you move. You stop taking everything personally because you can see the architecture behind it. You stop expecting fairness as a default and start building it deliberately in the spaces you influence. You become more selective about what you give without question. Your time, your silence, your agreement. I didn't learn these rules early. Most of us don't. We learn them only after they have already shaped us, after years of small adjustments we didn't even realize we were making. And perhaps that's the quietest truth of all. Corporate life doesn't test your intelligence first. It tests your resilience in ambiguity, your ability to function, contribute, grow, stay whole without full information. It asks, how long can you navigate a room where half the rules are whispered? How long can you stay grounded when the criteria for success keep shifting beneath your feet? How long can you hold on to your sincerity while learning to read the silence? There's no badge for passing that test, no promotion that says you finally understood the hidden curriculum. But there is a quiet shift inside you, a settling, a recognition that you are no longer just a participant in the system. You are a witness to it. And in that witnessing lies the beginning of true choice. Not the choice to escape, but the choice to engage differently, to protect what matters, to give your best energy where it will be honored, and to stop apologizing for needing to understand the whole map, not just the parts someone handed you on day one. This is another thread in the quiet tapestry of 42 years of work, not offered as advice, not wrapped in regret, not as a mistake I needed to undo, just shared as something that became clear once I stopped filling every silence and learned to listen to what remained.